He ordered entire German villages burned to ground. Every house, every barn, because of a single bullet fired by one hidden man. That's not a myth. That's George S. Patton's own diary entry from the autumn of 1944. And the reason behind that order takes you straight into one of the ugliest, least talked about problems American soldiers faced in the closing months of World War II. Men waving white flags who weren't actually surrendering at all. By September 1944, Patton's Third Army had smashed across France in one of the fastest armored advances in military history. Then, in Lorraine, that momentum died. Fuel ran dry, rivers flooded, and Patton's men found themselves grinding through fortified towns and forests against an enemy that no longer fought by the rules anyone expected. Somewhere in that grinding, brutal campaign, a Third Army staff officer was shot by a hidden rifleman. And what Patton did in response tells you everything about the war he was actually fighting, a war far uglier than the swashbuckling legend built around him. Let's go back to what soldiers on the ground were actually dealing with. Throughout the European campaign, from Normandy through the Ardennes, American infantrymen kept reporting the same terrifying trick. A German position would raise a white cloth. Men would stand up, rifles lowered, thinking the fight was over. And then gunfire would open up from a second position, or from the very men who just surrendered. It's documented in soldier memoirs, oral histories, and unit accounts across multiple divisions. This wasn't one isolated incident. It was a pattern serious enough that veterans across different fronts remembered it decades later. Under the laws of war, specifically the Hague Conventions, abusing a flag of truce to kill an enemy who has lowered his guard isn't just dirty fighting. It's a war crime. What most people don't know is that this created an impossible bind for American commanders. Do you honor the white flag every single time, knowing it might cost your own men's lives? Or do you treat every surrender with suspicion, knowing that can mean gunning down men who are actually trying to give up? There was no clean answer, and Patton, of all commanders, was not a man built for clean answers or patient half-measures. Here's where the record gets specific. Historian Rick Atkinson, in his Pulitzer Prize, winning account of the Western European campaign, documents that when a sniper fired on a Third Army staff officer, Patton didn't respond with targeted manhunt or a quiet court-martial threat. He ordered retaliation on a much larger scale. German homes in the surrounding area burned in response. Patton wrote about it himself, almost matter-of-factly, noting that in village after village there wasn't a living thing, not even a chicken left standing, and that most of the houses were reduced to piles of stone. Then he added a line that tells you exactly how he saw it. They brought it on themselves. I did most of it. Sit with that for a second. This is not a Hollywood one-liner invented for a movie. This is Patton's own private diary, the place where a man writes what he actually believes, not what he wants history to remember. And what he believed was simple and brutal. If you hide among civilians, if you use deception to kill his men, the retaliation would not be surgical. It would be collective, and it would be devastating. But what happened next in that same campaign shows how deep the paranoia around surrender had already spread to the Allied ranks. And it didn't start or end with Patton. Just a few months later, in December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, a similar tension played out at Bastogne, a town Patton's Third Army would soon race to relieve. On December 22nd, four German soldiers approached the American perimeter of the besieged 101st Airborne Division under a white flag, this time genuinely offering terms. One officer carried a briefcase with a formal surrender ultimatum for surrounded Americans, who were outnumbered roughly 5-1, freezing and low on ammunition. The American commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, gave a reply that's become one of the most famous lines of the entire war. Nuts! Whether the Germans understood what that meant is its own small piece of history. Reportedly, the response had to be explained to confused German negotiators. That moment became legend precisely because it was a genuine flag of truce, honestly presented, honestly refused. But it existed in the same theater, the same winter, as the very real fear that the next white flag might be a trap. Soldiers didn't get the luxury of knowing in advance which one they were looking at. 6 hours after this real surrender attempt, Patton's forces were driving north to break through the Bastogne, part of the extraordinary maneuver where he pivoted an entire army corps 90 degrees in the middle of winter to relieve the siege, a logistical feat historians still study today. His men were pushing through the same freezing terrain where trust in any raised flag could get you killed. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe, because the ending reveals something most history books barely mention: the difference between the myth of Patton as a swaggering showman and the documented reality of a commander who governed through fear, retribution, and a brutal personal calculus about what kept his men alive. Here's what most retellings of Patton get wrong. The popular image is a general who cracks a clever one-liner, outsmarts a German trap with some brilliant tactical maneuver, and rides off triumphant. That's the version YouTube thumbnails love. The real story was stranger than the myth, and far less comfortable. Patton didn't respond to the threat of ambush and treachery with cleverness. He responded with scale. Burn the houses, not just the sniper's house, the surrounding houses. Not a warning, a message delivered through destruction, meant to reach every village down the road. And that's when things took a turn nobody expected. Because this wasn't unique to Patton, and it wasn't universally accepted even within the U.S. Army. Retaliatory destruction against the civilian population for the actions of hidden combatants sat, and still sits, in a deeply contested moral and legal space. Some officers saw it as a grim necessity in a lawless stretch of fighting. Others saw it as collective punishment bleeding into something far darker than legitimate warfare. Historians today still debate how to weigh Patton's diary entries. Are they honest field reporting from a commander protecting his troops, or evidence of a man whose brutality crossed the line even by the standards of total war? There is no settled consensus, and any script that hands you a clean verdict is oversimplifying a genuinely difficult historical question. What we do know, without dispute, is this: the fear of the fake surrender was real enough that it shaped tactics, wore down trust between soldier and enemy, and pushed a commander as famous as Patton toward decisions he was willing to record in his own handwriting rather than deny. That's not the swashbuckling war movie version of Patton. That's the version historians actually argue about. So here's the real climax of the story. Not a clever trick, not a dramatic reversal, but a hard truth about how deception in war doesn't just cost lives in the moment it happens. It corrodes something bigger. One soldier stopped trusting a raised white flag. Every surrender becomes a gamble, for both sides. Genuine attempts to give up, like the one at Bastogne, get treated with the same suspicion as an ambush. Innocent villagers, nowhere near the sniper who pulled the trigger, pay a price they had nothing to do with. And a general who was already a lightning rod for controversy leaves behind a paper trail that historians are still trying to fully reckon with 80 years later. That's the story behind the myth. Not a single made-for-TV moment where Patton outwits a German trap with a wink and a cigar. A messier, harder truth. A war where the rules of honorable surrender kept breaking down on both sides, and where the man leading the charge answered treachery not with restraint, but with fire. So the question worth sitting with isn't whether Patton was right or wrong in that moment in Lorraine. It's this: when an enemy breaks the rules of war to gain an advantage, how far should the response go before it becomes something else entirely? Patton had his answer. Do you think he was justified, or did he cross a line that no military necessity can excuse? Let me know what you think in the comments.